this is a great time to be back to making music, and after all this thing everybody went through last year.
I mean, every interview we start and we talk, we have no choice but to inevitably touch upon it, because obviously it's a subject that has affected everyone in the world. But before we get into that, first I just want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know it's such a crazy busy period.
I'm tickled to death. Hey, listen, as you'll learn during this period of time, I really like to talk.
Yeah.
So, and they have a lot of stories to tell, that sort of thing. But is last year, Carl, we had about 70 some shows lined up, to go out and do just in the States. And I had a period of time in July reserved in case we wanted to come back to the UK and make it our 4th trip over.
Yeah.
And but then all of a sudden, this March 12th this past year, a year ago from then, everybody in the music industry, as well as a lot of other businesses, were sent home and told them to take their work tablet, and work from home until further notice. And that really didn't start changing until about May of this year over in the States. And it was very frustrating for me when those dates started moving, because when they sent everybody home, the thing that you and I are doing right now called Zoom, was basically not used that much in the industry. So all of a sudden, you're trying to get people on the phones, and people are calling me, because most of the promoters have my personal number that book us, and they say, Rich, what's up? We can't get in touch with anybody. None of your agents are answering the phone. We need to move these shows. And so I would text our main guy, Travis James at UTA, and he'd send me a picture of him turkey hunting in camouflage with a gun, and he's like, I'm taking off a while, man, so it was really good that everybody had the ability to have cell phones, but nobody was using them, because everybody went home, and all of a sudden they were trying to become used to the idea of getting up and working in your pajamas or boxer shorts with a bowl of cereal instead of going to the office. So, which had a double entendre to it, because everybody became used to that circumstance. And so then when everybody told everybody, okay, in May, we're opening back up, you come back to the office, they become acclimated to the other circumstance. And, you had women that worked in the workforce, had, didn't need a babysitter because they were home, and they didn't need to go pick the kids up at school because dad could do it now because he's home. So all this had to flip-flop back to our normal standard. So I saw a lot of crazy stuff happen during that time. A lot of kids, women crying like, I can't believe we got to go back to work, and it was almost like a lot, most kids when they're in the first grade, they all get a little upset having to leave mom and dad and go to school. And it was kind of almost childish in a way how everybody was about that. That's just an observation I had. And but we still, and I think the hardest thing on everybody, or at least we're from a really large family, and we live on the family farm here in Kentucky, and not to be able to, like my son, who's a drummer in Blackstone Cherry, just lives like, I could throw a rock almost and hit his house, and then my parents' house down on the farm, excuse me, and we could see each other out in the yard, but we couldn't go in the house and, have Thanksgiving. And that was a terrible feeling. And so that was probably the hardest part for us. And I'm sure everyone over in the UK can relate to that as well, because, we were speaking to our friends that we'd met on tour over there, and they were telling us at one point where they lived, you had to have an appointment to go to the grocery store. Excuse me, I got a bug in my mouth or something. Well, it's and of course the mask that everybody wears you couldn't really recognize all your friends
Mm.
that well, but you go to a grocery store and everybody tried to be real careful and that sort of thing. But I tried to do a lot of my excuse me, shopping. Dude, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right.
I've got it's cold here. I hope I'm not getting the cold. I already had the COVID, so I'm over that. But
Oh, you had it, yeah?
yeah, we had Carl, we there's a little band another little band that I work with called the Georgia Thunderbolts. And they I thought after helping Black Stone Cherry get started, I'd probably never find another bunch of kids I'd want to really stick my neck out for and work that hard. And those kids opened for us, the Thunderbolts down in Georgia. And well, I had the bus window open and the music kicked in. I said, wow, we might want to turn the steam up a little tonight. And then this kid opened his mouth and I went and watched him. And I literally felt like that I had unearthed a time capsule from like the early 70s of Southern rock. And they weren't like trying to be something. They were really the real deal. You know, they had this greasy Southern rock thing about them that you'd have to live in Georgia and walk in red clay to have, you know. But I, of course, got them a record deal with Mascot, same label Blackstone's on. And we've been trying to use them on as many shows as we could. And we played a show and I had them on it. And we were supposed to play outdoors. It had a huge venue there to play in, but they had it set up to play outdoors with a big stage and all. And it started really looking risky for rain. So we made the call to move indoors, which was not a good plan because three of us, Fred, my brother who plays drums, myself, and our sound man, Steve Wilson, who's been with us 30 years, three of us got COVID the next day, and then three of the Georgia Thunderbolts. So, you know, here we are already being glad to be back to work and having to cancel 2 weeks of show. And then I had the Thunderbolts leaving and going out with Marshall Tucker band and had to cancel those. So
it's frustrating, but it's almost now an inevitability that at some point or another it was going to hit you in some way. You know, you're here, you got through it, so that's good.
Right. It's just if I could just get rid of these confounded allergies I still have. You know, Kentucky is well known for maple sugar trees. And so right now the leaves are falling. And I don't care if you are indoors, you know, if you've got allergies or you're allergic to maple leaves, you get this right here. So actually it doesn't help to take allergy medicine. It's, you know, I do, but I don't think that it can turn away the elements, you know.
No, I think it's often more placebo than anything else. I love talking to someone like yourself from your location because, you know, I'm sitting here in the concrete jungle that is London, the capital of England. And so greenery, country, anything like that is very far removed.
Right. Well, yeah, we're very fortunate. We live on a family farm. It's been in our family, some of it for since the Revolutionary War, which I guess it's okay to talk about that with you guys. But it's actually General Nathaniel Greene. One of our many great grandfathers was one of his sidekicks during the war, and so all of his officers they were given a tract of land when you know, the country was finally settled. And we had actually our family got 7,000 acres, and you know, over the years, families don't want to keep their part, or they, you know, that sort of thing. And so over the past 300 years, it's dwindled down. My dad was able to hang on to 250 acres of it. Plus, we have another 500 that, you know, down the road where we were actually raised, where the music house is, and that sort of thing. But it's a funny story. My dad told me we've lost both of our parents in the past 4 years, but which is they were really the matriarch and patriarch of what we did, you know, and always looked after us. They weren't go to concert parents that much, you know, but they believed in us. They never really ever said, cut your hair and get a job, boy. You know, they believed in what we were doing, that sort of thing. So my dad and I, before he passed, he wanted to go over to the farm, what we call the old place, Big Meadow. And he hadn't been over there for a few years, and they just picked soybeans off of it. So we drove over there, and all these big fields, you know, were clear. And he goes, you know, Richard, isn't it amazing that this used to always be plum and peach orchards? And I said, no, it didn't, Daddy. And I'm thinking he's being old, you know. He said, oh yeah. He said, our family hundreds of years ago actually made plum and peach brandy for the government. And I'm going, so we were bootleggers? He goes, no, it was legal. But he said that's kind of how our family got their start, and that in farming. And so Daddy never told us that in all of our years. He never said, and I guess he thought maybe his time was coming short. And he said, maybe I better pass this along so the guys know it, you know. But it was a family secret, I guess, from hundreds of years ago. And so I thought maybe he was just old and spilled the beans accidentally, but I think he just wanted us to know it in the end. He was a historian and English teacher for 39 years. So, but it's always great to find out things, most of the time, that is, about your family. You know, hey, sometimes things get dug up, you know, you wish it stayed buried, I guess. But, you know, let's face it. I mean, over here in the States, we all came from where you guys live or mainland Europe. So there weren't that many of us. So there's a deep kinship of family there. You know, you can find out. My dad was also a genealogist, and he found, you know, he always traced back family records. And so a lot of people, you know, you find out people that you were kin to or related to from way back when, and people go, that's impossible. You couldn't be kin to them. But they are too. They just don't realize it. There's only so many of us that came over here in the beginning, you know. So because we didn't really have, you know, people coming over from all different dialects and countries, you know, at that time, mainly just from where you guys live, you know, in Scotland and Ireland and, you know, Germany or whatever. So it's a pretty close knit bunch of people. And of course, over the years, that's disseminated quite a bit. But I know my dad had us traced back to actually George Washington, our first president. His wife, was a relative. And then Daniel Boone, the famous, you know, frontiersman. And, you know, you're almost afraid to tell people that, you know, we have records of it, but the thing of it is you're afraid to say anything about it at school. And you tell some kid that, or you tell a teacher, and they say, what, you lost your mind? You know, but it's, you know, something that we're all, and if you could trace back the early records of your family, just like you guys, I mean, Lord knows what you guys have it back to, because the thing that I you know, like the 14th century or 13th century or something, you guys could be traced back to. And but I find that all very interesting. And another thing that as I said, I wouldn't fly for 34 years. So Blackstone Cherry kept coming over, you know, and doing well in the UK. And they would come home and John Fred would say, Dad, you got to get on an airplane. I'm telling you, y'all have a whole nother life over there. There's not an interview or a day goes by that somebody doesn't ask, when's your dad's band coming over, the Headhunters? And they always would say, well, probably never, Daddy won't fly. And I guess they got tired of hearing it. So they cornered me down on the farm one day and said, listen, the jig's up, Daddy. You're going to get on an airplane. We're going to find you some gigs over there. And you know how when you, Carl, when somebody bugs you about something so much, you finally just says, okay, sure, hoping that they'll forget about it.
Yep.
Well, they always didn't forget. And they called me a week later and said, Dad, you're not going to believe it. We got you on this great rock festival over in Sweden. And I was like, wait a minute. it was called Sweden Rocks. And and I was like, wait a minute, I didn't say anything about no Sweden. I said I would go to the UK. Yeah, but you got to do this, Daddy. Queen's a headliner that day, and you're going to get seen by thousands and thousands of people. Well, and we did. But I got to tell you, Carl, the minute they told me and I knew I had to get on a plane, I was a nervous wreck. I didn't sleep for 3 months. And, but I had a little friend that I graduated from high school with who became, went to college and then moved to Atlanta, Georgia and became an airline stewardess. And she's now my age, 66. So she only flies, overseas to Europe and UK and that sort of thing. And special privileges, I guess you call that, or too old to be on all flights. And but anyway, I called her because I knew she had a lot of experience with planes and that. And she said, Richard, you'll be fine. Said, listen, I've got, I go to the UK all the time. I'll just book, you tell me when you're going, and I'll just make sure that I'm on the plane.
Oh, cool.
And I thought, oh, great. So, that'll make me feel better. So that was the Swedish gig. And so anyway, she booked to fly over. And then the morning of, we had played the night before in Atlanta, so we could be there at the airport because at that time we didn't have direct flights from Nashville. We do now. And she calls me and she says, Richard, I can't go. I've got my grandson's sick. And I'm going, holy mackerel. Now what do I do? So he said, you'll be fine. But I got on there. And I guess that the boys had kind of, all the rest of the crew and the band had kind of alerted the stewardesses that I might get a little nervous because, when they shut the doors and they're starting up the engines, everybody in the band's like looking at me like, is he going to go off? Wacko or something, And anyway, the stewardess, one of them came, got me and said, Mr. Young, would you like to sit back here in the back with us? And so I said, well, yeah, I can. Said, you'll be more comfortable. And she meant everybody else will be more comfortable if you get out of here, So I went back there and they set me down by the refrigerator and it was full of Heineken beer. So I just enjoyed myself terribly talking to those pretty stewardesses and having that Heineken beer. So I don't even hardly, it didn't bother me at all. And then we almost getting ready to get home. And we flew from Malmo, Sweden into Denmark. And we're going to fly to Atlanta. And, John Fred calls me up again. I said, if I can just get back to Atlanta, get back on the ground in the States, I won't have to do this again. And John Fred calls me in Denmark. Dad, you're not going to believe it. We're going to play the Ramblin' Man Festival. We're going to be headlining. And we want you guys to come and be one of our opening acts. And I'm like, oh, man, I ain't even got home yet. Now you're wanting me to go back? So we decided if we were going to come to the UK, we weren't just going to fly over and play one show. So, yeah. So our booking agent over there, Martin Jarvis, who helps us terribly a lot, he he actually started booking some other rooms. So we played the Borderline first in London. And then we went from that to the Ramblin' Man in Moat Park. And we went ahead and played 6 other famous rock clubs in the UK. And we did it all in 8 days straight, that was a marathon thing for a bunch of older guys that, now we weren't uncomfortable. We didn't have our comfort of our little bus, tour bus. Like Stone Cherry had 2 buses, but we had none over here, so over there. But it was nice. I mean, it was a Mercedes with captain's chairs, those Sprinter vans. And the hardest part for us was we've been used to getting on the bus here at home and going out and waking up and we're in the town we're going to. And this way we had to, we had to go to hotels and sleep and get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, take showers and leave to go to the next town. And we had a Big Mike Allen, who's somewhat of a famous guy that drives, he's retired Scotland Yard, that drives bands around when they come over from the States. And he's, as I said, he's retired Scotland Yard. So he's somewhat of a very disciplined guy.
Yeah.
So I know the first morning after we played the Borderline, we were headed to over to Ramblin' Man. Is Fred and I were a minute late coming downstairs, and he looked at his watch and he said, "I thought I said 8 o'clock, not 8:01." So we kind of got the message that we were going to be, watched over very carefully. And I know it was kind of hard to switch from, sleeping till 10 o'clock in the morning on a tour bus or 11, and then to have to get up and you take a shower and ride, 150, 200 miles. But it was a lot of fun. And, we liked it so much. We've been back twice since then and played 8 more. And I thought, it's pretty amazing. We pamper ourselves over here in North America, and with the bus and all that, and the 5-man crew and everything. And, it was fun because it was like when we were kids again, riding in our old potato chip van, going down the road. And I was especially proud of myself because Mike and I always sat up front and he drove. And, after about 30 minutes, I'd look back and the whole band and crew, the rest of the guys were all sound asleep, and I'm like, I never took a nap the whole time we were over there. So me being next to the oldest, I thought that was pretty remarkable. Yeah, at least for me, it was.
I mean, because obviously it's such a massive difference. As you say, you can pretty much do most of our major cities in the UK in a week. And because, as you said, it's not like it takes you 10 hours to drive from one city to another in this country. You can be there in a matter of 2 or 3 hours, depending upon traffic.
Right.
The one thing we've got is a ton of bloody traffic.
Right. Well, and the thing, Carl, that I enjoyed the most about that was we actually, in America, I mean, I've been past the Grand Canyon probably 50 times in my life in the middle of the night, but I've never been there in the daytime and seen it.
Oh.
So what was great about being over there and being with Mike and having the Sprinter van is I sat up front and I got to see all the landscape and the castles. And, actually our family came from England on my grandmother's side, the Shirleys. So I got to see where the Shirley Castle was, and which, just all that kind of thing. Of course, Big Mike, our family came from up around the north side of England before you get into Scotland. And so Mike, we're going down the road and he says, "Yeah, but I don't want to disappoint you, but I want you to know about your family over here is they're notably known for either to be royalty or criminals." And I said, "Oh, okay." So he said more toward the criminal side. And no, he was joking, of course, I hope.
Back then, all the royals were criminals anyway, so it kind of works out.
Yeah. But we and I was amazed at the agriculture over there. You guys make use of every ounce of farmland, and actually, our farm we're not the kind of farms like they have at Lexington where they have all the big fancy fences and stuff. Ours are the fence rows are kind of grown up in what we call honeysuckle and things like that. So I felt right at home with the hedgerows. That's kind of what and you don't see barbed wire. You don't see a whole lot of, it's just real clean over there. And once you get out in the country, I thought, and real well managed and that sort of thing. And I know when we got up close to Scotland, I started seeing these little white specks all over the hillside, and I said, "Well, what is that?" And it was sheep. It amazed me. And also your cattle, your milk cows. I mean, good gracious, y'all's milk cows look like they could win the Kentucky State Fair. I mean, there's so much greenery for them over there, and you guys don't have to feed as much hay as we do. We have to feed a lot of forage. My brother and I just bought 300 rolls for our cattle, and we're actually thinking about buying more. They're 1,200-pound rolls, and we put them out. But it seems like if it's already getting that cold here, it's supposed to frost tonight. And I got this afternoon. My job is I got to hit our family garden because we raise a lot of peppers, like hot peppers and green and red peppers and that sort of thing, and as well as other garden species of thing, corn, beans, and what have you. But our peppers were late this year, so they're just now about getting ready to pull. So this afternoon, the whole family's going to have to hit the garden, and we're going to have to get our peppers because frost hits them. They're gone.
Do you sell them?
No, we use them. We give them away to neighbors and family, and we use a lot of them. We can a lot. The past 2 or 3 years, I have not had time to do something. I really like to take jalapenos and serrano peppers. And what I do is a little recipe here is to save them is you get the little quart jars or a pint, and you get apple cider vinegar and pour it into a big chili type kettle, and you boil that vinegar, and then you cut up the peppers. Of course, you cut the end of the stem off and just dice them up, and then you cram those jars full of them, and you put 1 tablespoon of salt on top of the peppers. Then you take a cup, and you fill it up with that cider vinegar and put your top on it. Then when it pops, that top, that means it's sealed. And so you've got, for a year almost, you've got jalapenos to have for cooking or serranos. Some of the species don't do as well. Your like normal red peppers or green you get in the grocery. Sweet peppers don't can as well, but man, those jalapenos. I actually won the local county fair with a jar of my pickles a couple of years ago before COVID hit. I had some that had turned red and some that were still green, and I mixed those, and they were so Christmassy looking. So I had about 40 jars of them. So I went around the neighborhood on Christmas Eve morning and delivered all these peppers to everybody. And I didn't know at the time what caused it, but we have a Mexican restaurant here, and the fellow that owned it, I took him a bushel of peppers before it frosted that year. And he said, Richard, he said, I'm from Mexico. I've never tasted jalapenos this hot. What's your secret? And I said, I don't know. It must be the salt or something. But then I got to thinking back. I didn't know when I was first starting this at the time, that you need to keep, like, there's a pepper called a habanero, which is hot. It's too hot for people to eat. And I thought I'd experiment and grow a row of those too. But I put them next door to my jalapenos. Well, not beknownst to me, they cross-pollinated. Oh. So the jalapenos picked up from the habaneros. So it was a lesson learned, but they were really good. I liked them. It wasn't that hot, but a little more normal than the normal jalapenos. And those are great in chili. We on our farm, we have a lot of wildlife. So we turkey hunt for wild turkey and also for deer. And man, there's nothing better. My wife made some last night. Is deer chili. You ground up deer meat and then you chili. A lot of people don't like venison because they really don't know how to cook it.
Right.
You gotta have there's nothing better than fried tenderloin, and a little biscuit, and butter. As you can tell, I haven't missed any of those meals.
It is incredible. What keeps you constantly busy? I mean, we haven't even started to touch upon the Kentucky Headhunters, what you're currently doing right now. I want to ask you then, considering how you've ridden out the wave of COVID, what about the band overall? Do you guys, as a unit, think you've come out stronger from this COVID period?
Well, this is 53 years for Fred and Greg and I. And then Doug Phelps, who sings and plays bass, 36 years in the Headhunters. So I don't think I know not in our lifetime have we had to be faced, as we all have.
Yeah.
Everyone in the world has been faced with something probably not as disastrous as the Spanish flu in 1918 that was so dramatic and killed so many. And I know my grandmother got it and was in college in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and almost lost her life. But the I think, yes, what it did, Carl, to me is, and I'll kind of slide into talking about the album here a little bit. While we were all off, we got to sit back and look and think over 53 years, what turns did we do right and what turns did we do wrong?
Right.
And so kind of assess where you'd been, where you come from, where you'd been. And because, a lot of folks may not know this, but we, having that old farmhouse, I guess we got, pretty good quite early. And so when we got out of high school, Capricorn Records, which was the famous Southern rock label in Georgia, who had the Allman Brothers and, Wet Willie, a lot of the great Southern rock bands. Charlie Daniels was on the label. They hooked us right up. I mean, as soon as we got out of school, we actually were moved to Atlanta and started playing bars around there, and kind of they were grooming us, I guess, to be a part of that. And then the label started to go wane because, Southern rock, and this was 76, 77. So it was kind of tail end. So it's starting to go south a little bit. And, then Leonard Skinner crashed, that October 77. Matter of fact, that would have been the 20th, I think, just a few days ago, many years ago. And so the next morning we kind of looked at each other and said, nobody's going to sign a Southern rock band right now, because Leonard Skinner was carrying the torch for it, and there were a lot of other Southern rock bands, but they were the true one that was really carrying the torch. And so we packed up our little bread truck and came home and licked our wounds and went back to, playing 4 or 5 states around here and bars and things, rock bars that would allow you to do originals. We wouldn't do a bunch of covers. We wanted to play our original material. If we did do a cover, we'd change it. Like we'd take Drive My Car by the Beatles and do our own thing with it, as an example, And so that next winter, it started really snowing badly, and we had a huge snow, and we were all kind of trapped down at Mom and Daddy's house on the farm. And we started going through album covers and said, man, we got a lot of great original material. It's time to start looking in another direction for maybe a record deal. So we got out the album covers and started looking, and we came up on Led Zeppelin Swan Song Records, and we heard, now there's the label to be on. And, and of course, to show you how ignorant we were, it was Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock home, which was 6 o'clock in New York City. Somehow or another, I don't know how I did it, I got a phone number for Swan Song Records office. And we just called them up at 6 o'clock on Friday evening. There's nobody at a record company on Friday afternoon at 6 o'clock. And when we finally did go to Swan Song, there was a lady there they had the Rockefeller Plaza, the whole floor. And when the doors opened up, there was this lady sit there that would remind you a whole lot of Colonel Klink's secretary on Hogan's Heroes. Nobody got past Helen, but she was gone. But there was a young fella named Mitchell Fox that worked for the label, and he was actually the same age as me at the time, 21. And he could never resist. Mitchell can't resist that, not answer a phone if it rings. So he was leaving the office late and picked up the phone, and I guess I got him on there and did a spiel with him or something. And he said, okay, I got to come see the band. I got to come see you. So he flew to Louisville, Kentucky, and he actually said, and he was quite New York, by the way, upper crust Jewish boy from Great Neck, New York, and very dry at first. And so he said, I'm going to fly in. He picked me up at the airport at 8 o'clock, and then I'll watch the set, and then I'll fly back on a red eye.
Yeah.
And so anyway, long story short, we fell in love with each other, and we had to push him through the turnstile on Sunday. took him to the airport and became great buddies. And to this day, we're still, he's like mine and Fred's other brother, and he actually lives in Nashville now and has a family and has a restaurant. He used to completely, well, he still does, but it's, not like it used to be our manager, but he still is my go-to guy.
Yeah.
So I managed the band these days alone. It used to just be he and we had a 1-2 punch thing. So we still use the 1-2 punch when we need it. But long story short, everybody we started doing demos, and everybody in the New York office at Swan Song loved the band, said, we got to get them on the label, So let's get the demos together. And Mitchell, you need to go talk to Peter, which was Peter Grant. And there's actually a book out, Peter Grant, world's greatest rock manager, whatever, Led Zeppelin and beyond.
Yeah.
If you haven't read it and you like music, you should read it, because it takes his life from being a guy that swept up popcorn in the theater to managing one of the biggest bands of all time in rock.
Incredible.
And so anyway, so Mitchell calls Peter, and he flies over there. And it tells in the book that Mitchell stayed in the house for 3 days, or castle, I guess, whatever, where Peter lived. And he said he could hear him upstairs walking around, but he wouldn't come down. So it's quite funny. He paid for Mitchell to fly this over, but he never came down. And so he told Mitchell finally, he said, just leave the tape in the fishbowl, and I need you back in New York. And so the fishbowl actually was a fishbowl that was full of cassette tapes that Peter had received. And, when they went through them after his death, there was Metallica, U2, all these bands that sent their cassettes. And we happened to be one of them. And before we could actually get, and the fact that New York was very interested, eventually they would have gotten to Peter and talked to him, which would have talked to Jimmy and the guys and all that. But before we could make that happen, Mitchell hadn't been back for just a few days. John Bonham passed. And so there goes another thing, it's amazing how people that live 7,000 miles away from you can change your life like that, just in the blink of an eye. And that really set us back a little bit, because it was such a great opportunity and such a happy time, and things were going so well, and to have that happen, and not to mention the fact that, my favorite rock band was gone, as well as the opportunity with Swan Song. So we did overcome it, and eventually decided we'd take another stab at it. And we're still playing bars, and all of us were playing with other people. Not me. I was a songwriter, like a froze for a while, and so, but the other 3 boys were playing, with country acts for the most part, and to make money. And because all of a sudden country was starting to change, and you had these talented rock musicians that, everybody was trying to get. So obviously Greg, Fred, and Doug came in there. And when we started to decided in '86 we were going to make another stab at it, and Anthony, our other cousin, our mothers or sisters, decided, he'd just gotten married and he had a day job, and we were just playing on the weekends. And he said, guys, I don't know if I can take another butt kicking like the last 2 we had,
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was a big letdown. And so anyway, Greg had been playing with Doug Phelps and a rockabilly singer, Ronnie McDowell's band. And Doug, he wanted us to hear Doug. He said maybe Doug would work. So Fred and I actually snuck into a gig and watched him play. We didn't want to, make the meeting if it didn't look right. So anyway, we liked Doug, and he was a nice looking fella. And so we came up to the music house, and we just, all bonded. And so Doug was a little younger than us, and we had or at least we thought we had a great training of the background of blues and R&B and that sort of thing, and knew how to play it. And in all honesty, we went back to the ground floor and relearned everything that we thought we knew
Right.
correctly. Like, you know, a lot of bands play the song Johnny Be Good that Chuck Berry did. And, but most of them play it like a VFW band. It's a thing, and it's really dun, 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 you know, and that came from Johnny Johnson. His left hand. Chuck learned how to adapt, which it took me forever. My brother and I, only fist fight we almost had was because I wouldn't practice hard enough to learn to play,
Oh,
figure out how that groove went. And because I was lazy, and he would not let me out of the practice house, so I learned it one night. And it's, you know, I wouldn't take anything for that experience, because it's basically, if you do that right on the rhythm guitar, you can actually move the whole room without a band being there. And that's what Chuck figured out.
yeah.
But it came from Johnny Johnson, which, if folks haven't heard the albums that Johnny did, we actually did his second solo album with him, recorded and wrote it. And this all came about through the movie Hell Rock and Roll, and and which is basically a documentary about Chuck Berry's life. And Keith Richards was asked to be the band leader for the grand finale show, and put together a crackerjack band for it. And so he said, I'll do it on one condition: if we can put Johnny Johnson and Chuck Berry back together. Because in reality, Johnny had a whole lot to do with the writing of those songs, but was never compensated. So, and Keith knew this from Ian Stewart, the Stones pianist. So anyway, they got together and they did the movie. And it was real funny because, you know, in those days, Johnny was Chuck's band leader. So it was real funny in the movie. If you look at it, you see him pointing at Keith Richards and Eric Clapton and telling them how to play the song. Amazing, you know. So then, you know, they say, wait a minute, who is this guy that's telling them how to play these songs? And of course, we knew who Johnny was because we'd listened to Chuck Berry ever since we were infants, and had only learned to do it right a few years. And then, so anyway, Clapton and Keith did a solo album with NRBQ, the New Rhythm and Blues Quartet, as part of the band. His first ever solo album was released on Electro Nonsuch. And it did so well that they wanted to do a second album on him. And it was actually Pierre who works for Keith, because Keith was saying, you know, we can't be flying these tapes around again, I guess, all over the country or whatever. You know, it took forever. And so I think Pierre suggested, why don't you get the Headhunters to do it? So they play this stuff well and they write well. So, and Johnny would love going down on the farm. So as it all came out between the record label people, Nancy Jeffers, and our management people and us and Johnny, we got it together, and he came to the farm. And you got to know, being on this farm, this little quaint house down on the creek, here we are sitting waiting for Johnny to drive up and get out and walk up that walkway. I mean, it was woo heavy. But anyway, we did his second solo album. And I'll be honest with you, we had to go back and really school ourselves, because Johnny had talked to me on the phone. He said, now, I don't want to do no more country music like I do with Chuck Berry, and I don't want to do really rock and roll. I want this to be more of a jazz album, a jazz rock album. And I'm like, oh boy. So, you know, I started pulling out my Billie Holiday albums and, you know, just getting the vibe of that sort of thing. And it came out quite well. And we became instant friends. And, you know, Johnny would go out, we'd go out and tour on that. We did things like the Conan O'Brien TV show, and people can look that up and Google. It's quite interesting because right before Johnny does a solo on TV, he goes, blows his nose in a handkerchief and then puts it back and then tears into it. Didn't care, man, you know. And so we were doing our solo album, and we'd cut the old Freddie King song that Billy Miles wrote called "Have You Ever Loved a Woman?" or going to. And we said, man, we need Johnny on this. So we called the house, and Aunt Frances, as we called her, later, his wife said, Johnny is out with the Rolling Stones. He's doing a guest appearance. Tonight's the last night. They're at the Reliance Stadium in Houston, Texas. And so here's a number of a guy, the road manager or whatever, and got Johnny on the phone. I said, Johnny, we want you to come and play on this song. Okay, I just changed my flight and y'all picked me up in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we did. But in the meantime, Frances let me know that he was quite ill with kidney cancer, and she wanted us to keep him there and let him go to mom and daddy's, eat all the country ham he wanted, red-eyed gravy, whatever. And it wasn't any point in trying to worry about being healthy at this point. And let him, smoke cigars, whatever Johnny did.
Yeah.
But she said, most of all, I want you to take the time to record some music with him while he's there. Write and record some things with him. And so we basically put our album on hold for 3 or 4 days. And when Johnny got there, we were literally wrote most of the album while he was there. I mean, we pulled a couple songs off his solo album, the Stumbling song, which gets played quite a bit in the UK on the radio. And then, I was literally between solos, or whoever was singing, me or Doug, we'd be like in the room writing the lyrics while those guitar solo and piano solos were going on as we went. And, I took the tapes home and put them away, and Johnny passed. And then Frances called a few years ago and said, Richard, I'm not doing too well, and I want you to get that album out. So we pulled the tapes out, and we're thinking, okay, we're going to have to this was done so quickly, and the lyrics, maybe some lyrics got to be rewritten or whatever. Man, we put that stuff up on the tape machine, and it was all there. I mean, we never touched it. It was just like God did it or something, Crazy.
Incredible.
So, yeah. So I called Bruce Eglar, that is, in Chicago at the Alligator Records, which is the premier blues label, in America. And I sent him the tapes, and he freaked, loved it. And so Alligator put it out, and it, went to #1 and all that jazz. And it was a big thing to have, which was actually our own album with Johnny playing, where the first album was his solo album with us, featured. So, but, I've got to do a lot of fun things, Carl, and between the farm and the music, we've lived a charmed life.
I love that you can talk like that as well. In the current period of releasing a brand new album, we are a few days away from when it was just actually released. Where's your head at with That's a Fact, Jack? How pleased are you with the early reaction, or have you been paying much attention to it?
Oh no, I've had to pay great attention to it because I'm talking to people as you and I are talking, doing interviews for it. All of the boys are, divide the interviews up depending on the direction, that sort of thing. But I actually, if I didn't have so many other stories to tell you, I would love for Doug to done this with you, because I heard you like, old monsters and stuff and spooky shows.
Yeah, it's a major part of our thing.
Oh, no, we're on the bus. I mean, Doug, he'll sit there and watch that for hours on end, and said, okay, sorry, Doug, it's time for Gunsmoke or Lucille Ball. Here we go. And, but it's the reaction has been very pleasing. And as I said earlier, when we went in cold turkey. We didn't get to rehearse because Greg did have the COVID before we went in. We didn't want to get him out in the elements. So we went in with just our little cassette tapes, and normally we would go in the practice house, but it was so cold, and we don't really have great heat there. You have to use kerosene heaters and things. There's no running water, which I love about it, and there's no address. I mean, I know we should. 911's always want to, man, you got to give us an address. You got to have it if something happened. And I said, it's the only place in the world that all the neighbors know where it's at. If something happens, we'll call them on the phone. But, we kind of pride that it's the house with no address.
Absolutely.
But we went in that, you know, and we did something this time we've never done. We didn't go in saying, okay, this is going to be a Southern rock album. It's going to be a blues album. It's going to be a country Southern rock blues album or whatever, jazz.
Yeah.
And we just went in and we said, okay, and we'll go back to what you said. You asked about the COVID thing and what it actually did to us. And it did. We went back and said, you know, the one thing that we've always never done is let everybody just pick out whatever songs. I mean, everybody, this is a very democratic band. You know, you might come in with lyrics and melody, but it ain't your song till everybody else writes on it. You know, it's always been that way. That's the way to be. I learned that from the Beatles. Too bad there wasn't more of that going around then. You know, they might still be here, but no offense to the living Beatles, but I do believe that.
No,
and I learned that, and I've watched that over the years. You know, and so beside and the writing is always that way, and it always has been with us since Itchy Brother days, starting in '68. But the one thing that we hadn't really paid attention to is let everybody sing. What song would you like to sing on the record, Fred? What song would you like to sing, Greg? And of course, Doug and I have always mainly done most of the lead vocal, but we just went in and everybody pick what you want to sing, what you want to play. Makes no difference. You know, it could be anything from polka to metal. We don't care. Then we're going to have fun with this because, you know, somehow or another, we've seemed to have survived this COVID thing, you know, and let's just, you know, we're very lucky to all be here. So let's just have fun. And we did. And it was very interesting that Greg actually picked the song called Shotgun Effie that's on the record, which was our first single we ever released in our lives.
Yeah.
Itchy Brother in 1973, and Greg wanted to go back and revisit that. He said, yeah, man, you know, we did that on a four track Bogan PA. Let's go back and, you know, do it in the studio. And it's really funny because there's not 10% difference in the two different versions, you know, one on a Bogan and one on the, you know, big multi-track mixer. And and then Fred wanted Greg to sing Cheap Tequila, Rick Derringer's song. And because that Fred had always loved that song ever since, you know, All American Boy came out and with Derringer on it, with Rick on it. And then Johnny Winters did a version. And I think we fell somewhere in the middle, but in the end, Fred was determined we were going to do it. So he said, well, I'll just sing it, which was brilliant because it came out sounding like a Kentucky guy mixed with David Bowie and Ian Anderson or something, you know. It's very strange, but he sells it, you know, and he sells the song in a different way.
Yeah.
And then Cup of Tea, Fred sang, which is, you know, as I said, our first time after I would fly when we came to the UK, is Fred basically wrote that song about our first night in London.
Yeah.
And how would it be, you know, when we started in '68, wouldn't it have been great to have been able to come over for the Mercy Beat and been there and, you know, when Twiggy and all that Carnaby scene was going on. And Fred has very insightful, I think, how he wrote it about a girl-boy love situation. And he talks about, you know, calling the people back home. And, you know, everybody's asking, what's a dog and bone? Well, dog and bone is the old time phone. The box part is the dog and the bone is the handle. Where does he come up with this stuff? But it's true. And then lemon and lime, I guess that's an old time saying of folks about tea time. Is that correct?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not great on my Cockney, I'll be honest. Dog and bone, yeah, but that one I'm not great on.
Okay. But anyway, Fred had always heard those sayings from the UK, and I guess you know, adapted them into the lyric he wrote for it. So, and it's a great take on it, brilliant lyrics. And I heard somebody say the other day, it's country meets Carnaby Street, 1968, which is true, you
What a
know.
wonderful description.
Yeah. But you know, and then of course Doug and I split up the ride, and then TJ Lyle happened to be from the Georgia Thunderbolts. The singer happened to be down on the farm visiting for a couple of weeks, and he and I, or Fred and he, wrote some of the lyrics for 2 or 3 songs, and so it was great to have him in there. And then the big kicker that most people don't know is the second song on the record, "How Could I," was actually written by myself and Blackstone Cherry in 2008.
Really?
Yeah, it was a group of songs we wrote for, I think it was 2008, for the second album, Folklore and Superstition. And you know, the label just was actually wanting, rather than me produce the second album, they wanted Bob Marlette to do it, who did Ozzy and some other people, and I was fine with that. But Bob wanted to write songs for the album, so all those songs got pushed aside, and there are many great ones there, and some of them have shown up. Matter of fact, "If My Heart Had Wings" came out of that bunch of songs. It's on Blackstone's new album, and so that song, it got passed over, but it always stuck with me as like, man, I think the Headhunters could do this song. You know,
Yeah.
obviously they could because I'd helped write it, but uh, I think we gave it a different spin than what Blackstone Cherry would have had on it, and they're excited to death that they've got a song on the Headhunters album. So yeah, I owe them about 50 or 60 more with all the songs I've written with them, but you know, we're getting a start there anyway.
Yeah, one down. What about the songs you do lead vocals on? Do you have a personal favorite of the lyrical content that you just enjoyed singing? The Watercolors in the Rain title track, Let's All Get Together and Fight.
Well, you know the story. The story behind "Let's All Get Together and Fight" goes back to the COVID message, where I'm sitting right here at my desk. A year ago, well, almost a year ago, last Thanksgiving, you know, as I said, you know, here we are. My son lives 5 seconds from me, and then our family farm and the practice house, it's all right here in this area. And, you know, here's the kids out playing in the yard, and we have to wave at them and stand at the yard. Don't come too close now.
Yeah.
And, you know, that sort of thing. And then Thanksgiving comes, which is the American holiday, you know, and Turkey Day, we call it too, you know. And so here we are sitting at home, and my wife gets up that morning and puts some deer roast and some red, you know, red potatoes and onions and carrots and all this in the crock pot. And you know, that's not what we eat for Thanksgiving. We have turkey and wild turkey and deer and country ham and all this stuff, and everybody shows up.
Yeah.
And there's always one or two though that we don't see all year, distant relatives that show up, and they, for some reason or other, they just gotta get noticed. They start a spree, you know, some kind of a little run in with someone, and or some lady made a cake that nobody liked, and she gets upset about it, or whatever it is. I know lots of times I have cut pieces of cake out and put in the waste can, put toilet tissue over it so nobody, or paper towels, so we can hold that one down. But I'm sitting here and I'm going, you know, is every time we get together, there's always something like that happens, but we can't even get together this year and fight. And all of a sudden it went, I was like, I got to write this. So that's where that one came from, is being home alone, you know, during COVID. And it also, we've actually been testing and playing that song since midsummer, and people just get down on the ground laughing, because most of us have a situation like that in our family where you get together and there's, you know, something happens.
Yeah.
No, I don't care. There's always some kind of little rub happens. It can't go perfectly every time. So that song means a lot because of that. And I guess Watercolors in the Rain is just, you know, a bit of a light wake up call to, you know, well, let's pay attention to what the kids do, because they're more innocent than we are. They haven't lived and seen some of the things that maybe might have made us not bitter, but maybe a little darker thinking. Let's try to, check that song out. That's a cool song. And
Mm,
it's like, it also talks about how fragile, because the title being Watercolors in the Rain, of how fragile we are as human beings. We're sensitive people. We're sensitive, and I think that portrays that in that song. And then that's a fact, Jack. I gotta be honest with you, is I always write happy songs for the most part, and or funny songs or whatever, party songs. And being here in the United States last year with this COVID and then all this terrible mess that was going on in our country, besides that, we won't talk about it, but ridiculous. And it, I guess it got the best of me, and I had to have a say about it.
yeah.
That's a fact, Jack.
It's,
Not my nature, but I kind of just, I sat and watched TV, and I watched all the sickness and the death, and then here we have all these people sick, and even though it was important, it didn't seem to be the most important agenda on TV. And I'm like, what have we become here? So I just had to say it.
it's it's completely understandable. Even if you don't want to, you can't help but be surrounded and sometimes just dragged down into that sort of what we would call a pit of despair by what you're seeing and hearing around you, even if you can let it bounce off you after a while.
Right, right. And I guess that with that said, I think Susanna is a great song. Doug brought that in. It's a great story about what it's really like to be a musician and have to be gone all the time. But at the same time, I think all your weekend warriors who still live at home and have a day job and play on the weekends, and their wife goes with them, and or doesn't, then I think they can also relate to it. And I guess maybe that's a little selfish take from a musician standpoint, but I can't see that other people would have to travel, like truck drivers and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's guys that drive us around in the bus all over North America or wherever, that all families can kind of relate to that someone having to be gone from home, if it's nothing more from 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Well, with that said, I've about talked your leg off, Carl. I guess I'd better get out and get those peppers picked.
Thank you very much for watching. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Tumblr. Go to Patreon to help us out over there. That's patreon.com/gbhbl, as well as Big Cartel, where you can find some of our merchandise. We have a podcast running on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you like this video, do us a favour, hit the subscribe button and help the channel grow. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?